Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for stopping by another Fugue Office Hours, where we're putting engineers in command of cloud security and compliance. Today, we're going to dive into writing custom rules for your AWS infrastructure environment using Open Policy Agent and Fugue. Before we get started, I want to let everyone know about our growing library of cloud security masterclass sessions. These are really fun sessions with Josh Stella, co-founder and CTO here at Fugue, where he takes us on some deep and seriously fun technical deep dives into a variety of different cloud security use cases and topics. We have one coming up on September 10th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time called Thinking Like a Hacker. Come join us, and we're going to go ahead and put the bad guy hat on to understand how they exploit our own misconfiguration mistakes. It's going to be a lot of fun. So, all right, let's get on with this session. Hey, Ricardo, you there?
I am here. How's it going?
Good, good. How are you doing?
I'm good. Glad to be back doing an office hour session. This is cool.
Yeah. What you got for us today?
So when we left off the last time, we were kind of brainstorming on what we should do for the next office hours.
Yep.
So we didn't have one last week. Part of the reason for that was I was working on custom rules. So we have customers that sometimes there's a little bit of assistance that might be needed in writing the custom rules. And we know that not everybody goes by kind of the cookie cutter standards that are in the compliance libraries. And that's really one of the cool things about Fugue is that you can create your own libraries of custom rules and define them however you like, which is really cool. So it does require some level of learning, but I think it's like anything else. If you're going to be using it all the time, if it's it's one of those things. I think programmers have this mentality: is if I can write it one time and then use it hundreds, thousands of times, then it's worth it. And I think custom rules are like that because it's going to be extensible throughout your environments. You'll continue to use it. We're using Open Policy Agent, which is an open standard writing policy as code. So if you start writing rules because your company's using Fugue today, there's a good chance, and we hope that your next company is using Fugue as well. But there's obviously a good chance that you'll be continuing to write rules in Open Policy Agent and Rego. So I will preface this session by saying I'm not going to teach anybody how to write custom rules. So we're not going to really teach how to write these rules. Really my focus today is to show you how it's used in Fugue, to show you where you can find examples of custom rules and how we can actually input it into the UI. And it's cool because our command line interface tool, you can incorporate the rules there in your own directory and then kind of sync them. That's really cool. We'll probably dig deeper into that in the CLI in another office hour session. But this is really, I want to show you how you would input a custom rule into the UI. We'll look at the evaluation of it and then where to find them, because we have a bunch of information that we've open sourced and is on our public GitHub repo. So I want everybody to be able to find stuff there.
Awesome.
So I am going to start sharing. And if you could confirm that you're seeing my screen.
I can see it. Yep.
All right. So from previous office hours sessions, we created our office hours global environment. We have our office hours Canada network environment. So I actually expanded that because I think there's some IAM stuff in there, but really it's just focused on the Canada region. If we recall, it's really just a condensed version of the overall global region. You always have connectivity issues when you go live. That's kind of a requirement.
It's AWS, right?
Or it could be Fortnite going on in my house. Anyway, so we recall this. This is the visualizer again, being able to see everything with what's configured, deployed in your accounts. The reason I'm going here is to show you the attributes. So with every resource, there are attributes associated with it. With custom rules, we can now interrogate these attributes with specific custom rules. So we can look for features that are associated with any of these instances. You can look for features that are relating to your network, features relating or attributes relating to your security groups, you name it. So all of this information, you have a wealth of information here that you can see. This is all the information that we're interrogating when we look at these open policy agent rules that we're writing. So what Fugue has done, you'll also notice with compliance families. So I didn't have any compliance families checked. So the only compliance family I have is custom. So, and this is becoming a really popular implementation amongst our customers is, some of these have checks that companies really aren't so concerned about. So there's certain things that they may have established as corporate governance. So it could be something like instance sizes, rules regarding permissions of users, those sorts of things that aren't part of these compliance frameworks. So that's where custom rules come in. And you can actually put your custom rules directly into Fugue's UI. So the way that we have it set up, and we'll actually look at an example here. So this is one that I did just playing around with custom rules. So how we would actually do that. So this is a tag rule looking for just a key. So I want to make sure that all of my instances have a name associated with them. And that's done through my tag. So having a name tag. So if you see what we have done in this implementation is some of this stuff is extracted. So if you're writing full open policy agent or Rego, which is the underlying language, if you're writing these rules outside of the UI, you do have to include some of this additional detail. Provider, resource type has to be defined, those sorts of things. So we've actually extracted those parameters for you, so you don't have to put that in there. And then generally with the simple rules, what you're going to find is there's just an allow or a deny statement. So in this case, it's an allow statement. So here I'm allowing, and it's an input, so my tags and name. So that's just the key value. I've decided that all of my EC2 instances at least have to have a name. And it's as simple as that. So what Fugue is going to do is it's going to interrogate every one of my instances that are deployed and is going to look for tags with a key of name. If it has a key of name, it's going to say it's compliant. If it does not have a key of name, it'll come up as non-compliant. What's nice as well is, people are always, whenever you're learning a new language or learning, syntax or something, you always wonder, like, am I going to get the syntax right? Am I going to screw it up? We actually have this nice validate Rego button here. So this is really nice to where I can click this button. If I have an error and I try to validate, I will get a nice convenient error message and unexpected end of input. I can add my bracket again and update the custom rule. Fairly straightforward. You could do this, right, Drew?
Absolutely, no doubt. I do it all the time.
So what I'm going to do, so we're just going to add one. So and for the purpose of this, one of the things that I think helps customers as they start to incorporate custom rules and they start writing custom rules is just to be able to see examples of how to do those rules. So this is in our public repo. You see I've not signed in, where you can get details. You can look at some of the simple rules, and we'll actually go through that process of adding a simple rule into the UI right now. And then we have additional complex rules. Now, when we say complex or advanced rules, it usually has to do with multiple resource types or some sort of relationship between those resource types. And that's really the power of using Open Policy Agent and Rego, is you can write those sorts of customized rules that will affect multiple resources. So we'll look at an example of that. And if for some reason this is too small, let me know. But you can see in this case, we're looking at all of the different taggable resources across AWS. So, and we define all of those. So the resource types are all defined here. And then really what the code is looking for is this statement here. Something that's properly tagged would have stage and prod. So we look at all these different resources and looking for a stage and prod tag. You have an allow statement, again, and deny statement of what's compliant and non-compliant. And what we've done to really make it somewhat easy for you is you can just cut and paste, which I'm going to do. Just something we all can do. So this is an example of a more complex rule, but I can go ahead and plug that in there. So the rule definition would go directly into this part. We know by looking up here, as this is defined, the provider is AWS, resources multiple. We can copy this description too. Must have stage prod tags. Can validate it. And we've created a custom rule. So essentially, every resource that we have within this environment now must have a stage and prod tag, and it will evaluate it. So all of the resources that aren't tagged that way, which I don't think I have any tag that way, are going to come up as non-compliant. And while we look at another one, we will go ahead and trigger a scan. So while that's scanning, we'll take a look at some of the other custom rules, and maybe we'll add another one. Another area where customers can find custom rules is in our regular repo. So we haven't talked a ton about regular, but this kind of goes to an additional benefit of using Open Policy Agent is you now have, you can do a level of pre-deployment checking and post-deployment checking. So if we look at some of the rules that we're checking in here, so we can actually look at some of these rules and we can take some of these rules and apply those pre-deployment using the same code, same language. We can also apply those post-deployment. So you can actually run your rules in two places. So today, regular works with Terraform, where you can inspect a Terraform plan against the rules, and we'll definitely go into more detail as we go along. But let's just look at some of these rules. So something that we may want to have here. In this case, you don't have to have a lot of this information. You can actually look at the resource type, and you can look at this statement here, which is a default allow is false, and then you're actually going to say what that allowable value is. So if I don't have this rule in here already, hopefully I don't, I will go ahead and add it. And we have it in a rules section. So this is another simple rule. So we'll say this is critical. And that is fully configurable. So you can decide how you want to, the severity level that you want to apply to any of these rules. But remember that rule value again is that default allow is false, and then allow is the encrypted value. So that input value of encrypted has to be true. We are looking at our EBS volumes. So that resource type is ec2.volume. And EBS, actually I have that there. So all of volumes attached to EC2 instances must be encrypted. And that probably won't get caught in the current scan, but let's validate again, make sure we're good. And we create the custom rule. So now you can see, so we're starting to have more and more custom rules, and you will get to a point where a lot of our customers are, is where they will just effectively use the custom rules, because many of the rules may or may not apply to what they're doing within the organization. But we also know that there's a stringent view within the compliance families, and some companies just may not have to adhere to everything that's associated with those compliance families. And that's why this custom rules engine, the way that we've implemented it, is so effective and so important for so many customers. And it also allows you to extend even more stringent policies if that's the case. An example of that is, we'll look in the other repo, is if you've established, say, a list of machine images. So the machine images that are allowable, that you have permitted, they're hardened, you've installed whatever software has to be installed. You could actually create a repository such as this. So you can have your own GitHub repository where you maintain a list of the approved AMIs. And obviously that can be extremely long, but what's really nice about it is the way this is written is Fugue will inspect each one of the AMIs in your environment. So any environment that you have this custom rule associated with it, it will inspect, it will look at all the AMIs that are in that environment, and it will do a comparison to make sure that that number or this AMI ID is present. If the AMI ID is not present, it will be flagged as non-compliant. And we often see that with customers that are updating on a regular basis. So you're not, tearing down infrastructure necessarily. You're just redeploying it. So you're not patching. You're not patching instances. You're just deploying new versions, and you will constantly do that, whether it's through the launch configuration or by other means. But it's just an ongoing cycle of updating the AMI, pushing that out, having your autoscaling group repopulate those AMIs, and you always want to make sure that those the AMIs that are approved, that are on that list. And so that's actually going to highlight anyone that's not on that list. It's going to call out and bring it to your attention so that you know that you need to go in and either delete it manually, delete it by the CLI, and let your launch configuration repopulate that instance. So really cool implementation there as we see that. So another area where you'd be able to apply that. But I do want to encourage folks that if you have the opportunity, definitely check out the Open Policy Agent site. So Fugue is a contributor to Open Policy Agent, but really a lot of really good information in the documentation to help you along the way as you continue to learn to write Rego, to write better policies. Other detail can be found docs.fugue.co. So huge shout out to our docs team, our policy team. This information is incredible. As you go through it and you start learning to write custom rules, it really starts to click. So I think it becomes almost like any other programming language. It will start to click. It will start to make sense. You also will become more and more familiar with some of the output attributes or the input attributes that you're looking for, and you'll be able to write better custom rules, more efficient. And there's also the ability to do testing of those rules too. So we have several different endpoints. So I would encourage you to look at our API docs as well. But you will be able to see details, how you can actually run a test rule against a previous scan to get the outputs, or even just kind of a JSON output of the whole environment to see the details of the query that you might be writing against. So a wealth of information is there. So we certainly encourage you to check this out. Send us feedback also. We haven't been shy about putting our contact information out there because we want to hear from you. If there are questions or anything like that, we certainly want to know. But we think there's a wealth of information that's here. You get UI details, API details. So again, shout out to our docs team.
They are fabulous, no doubt. So quick question. So if I have an existing AWS environment running and I'm worried that we might have AMIs running that are not on our approved list, I can use Fugue in a custom rule to identify those, so we can address them.
Yeah, what's really cool. So I'll do it through the visualizer. So anytime any evaluation that's done, so whenever you run your, whenever you have your visualizer and you see all your instances, you will see this attribute, the AMI ID attribute. So one of the things that you could do to test that, I don't know if I've switched, yeah. So you could take one of the existing AMI IDs. So I'm gonna do this kind of backwards. But yeah, so you could essentially, you know what I'm talking about. You could just take this AMI ID, remove that, add this AMI ID, and then write your custom rule, and then you would see how that evaluates. So unless these have the same AMI ID, they would evaluate as non-compliant. So I don't know if they're the same or not. They look like they're very similar. So they would all evaluate as compliant. But yeah, exactly like you said. If you have a list of all the current AMIs, and most companies do maintain that, yeah, it would be really easy to populate that list.
And like maybe like, you know, regions we're not allowed to be operating in, like perhaps maybe you don't want anybody spinning up infrastructure in the EU or somewhere else.
I actually would do that. I love these questions you come up with. I would actually do that a little bit different. So using, I would create, so if there's an environment that I didn't want people operating in, I would create a Fugue environment and just establish a baseline. And so anything that comes up in that environment is going to get flagged as a drift. So I would do that. You know,
yeah, that's a lot easier than writing some policy as code. Just be able to just get an alert.
Yeah, and I'm sure you probably could do it that way, but I would most likely, I would most likely just create another environment just of that region and set a baseline, and then if anything triggered, it'll come up as a drift alert.
That is very cool. Yeah, one of the things I'm interested in, because we cover a lot of I'd say hardcore cloud security rules and use cases, both with the collection of industry compliance standards that we provide out of the box, as well as our Fugue best practices, which kind of cover misconfigurations that the compliance regimes won't catch. But I'm always interested in kind of stuff that might be more in that category of like just company policy, aren't always necessarily like have like a real security reason, but it's more just what things we just don't want our developers doing.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, and we, through the process, part of that is, when we're doing our onboarding, most customers start out saying, hey, right now we're just concerned with CIS benchmarks, and that's fine for now. Typically, after they've kind of established that kind of initial scan and they've gotten that feedback, they start coming up with other rules, and then it's the process of, hey, what else can I check for? And then we just talk through that process. So it's pretty straightforward, but it is a process. Like there's a starting point, and I think we reiterate our point about Basecamp. So knowing what's out there, getting a kind of a readout on what you got. Mm-hmm. Is usually that first level, and then once you start figuring out, okay, this is where we want to go, this is how we want things to be operationally, that's when we'll start evaluating different custom rules, different attribute settings, those sorts of things. And one of the things that we point out a lot is that not everything is covered in these compliance families, and that's one of the reasons why we created Fugue best practices. So point that out as well. You could do your custom rules. If you're just looking for security and corporate governance, then you want to go Fugue best practices, and then whatever custom rules, you kind of put those together. And really quickly, just wanted to point out, so one of those rules was looking for making sure that the instances themselves had a name. And so as you can see in kind of this output, that each one of these instances has a name. In this other evaluation, I didn't want to sugarcoat it. This has missing data. All of these resources, so I just cut and pasted all these resources. I'm not scanning any of these resources in my environment. So Fugue is actually intelligent enough to tell me, Ricardo, you screwed up. You're asking me to evaluate a bunch of resources that you're not even scanning in this environment. So shame on me, but opportunity to point out that it's one of those things where very, very rarely are we doing something that we haven't thought of. And it's like, okay, we need to have some sort of message in here to let people know if we're not looking at a specific resource or you don't have those resources in your environment, Fugue is not going to do the evaluation. So we didn't get scan errors, but we are notified that that specific rule can't be evaluated because none of these resources are active in this account. So good for me. But this other rule that we created, this tag rule, that's there. And on our next scan, we'll be checking all the EBS volumes. So that rule will be updated as well. That's the beauty of live streaming, Drew.
Yeah. So we got a comment from Dave. Hey, Dave, if you keep showing up to these, we're going to have you on one of these coming up soon. So Dave wants to know, can this work on Azure or GCP?
So that's a great question. So Azure, yes. So we actually have in our custom rules repository, we have some simple rules. This is a Azure SQL firewall rule. So that's the other great thing, Open Policy Agent and Rego. It works across all of the platforms. So yes, you can write Open Policy Agent rules against Azure, against GCP. So today, we do not have GCP deployed in our production SaaS environment. But if you go to our regular, which is our pre-deployment checking, you will see some rules in here for GCP. Let me see if I can get there. Yeah, so you will see some GCP rules. Now, keep in mind, some of the resource type definitions the way that they are listed out is a little bit different. But, this is the resource type name for GCP. So you will see that. So very, very similar in terms of the construct of what you would have, whether it's a deny or allow, is the concept of the simple rule, and you'd be able to do that. So you can check GCP pre-deployment today. So yes, and Dave, Drew is absolutely right. I will be in touch.
Yeah. So I mean, the important point for me with this is that you're using Fugue to check your running cloud environments, and there's Regula there to check your infrastructure as code before you go ahead and deploy. But you're using the same language framework, policy as code, for both your running infrastructure environments and your infrastructure as code.
Yeah, we're not teaching you something that you're never going to use again. So I think that's the point. If you look at the Kubernetes community, some of the larger organizations out there are heavy users of Open Policy Agent. Our CTO's done talks at different conferences regarding just our use of Open Policy Agent. So it's becoming more and more popular. I think you're going to see other tools probably try to mimic what Fugue has done. But I think we've got it so heavily embedded. Just kind of our approach is just a really nice implementation. Obviously, I'm biased; it's my opinion. But from what we hear, and I get to talk to customers that are first experienced with Fugue, and that's some of them. That's the reason why they're talking to us. We're 100% Open Policy Agent. We see that you're using Open Policy Agent. We're already learning how to write rules this way. So it's just a natural progression for us to have a tool where we can apply the knowledge of how to write these rules. So it's really a nice thing for us and a nice implementation. And it's not super complex. When you get deeper into it and you're writing some of the more advanced rules, it can be a little bit challenging. But I think once you get it, it's just like anything else. You get it, it clicks, and you're rolling with it.
Well, aside from the importance of choosing an open source tool for something like policy as code, and languages and frameworks should be open source. It's that point that you made. It's pretty, the lift is pretty light to kind of get up and running and really using these tools, but they're capable of, remarkably sophisticated use cases as well. They're not just limited to this kind of, these simple applications.
Exactly. Yeah, and again, we've got a lot of documentation. We've actually created some tools. So we have some folks internally that are just incredible. So there's some tools that we have that will help people as they continue to write rules. But yeah, I'm starting to like it more. It was a little bit of a challenge, but I think once you understand the syntax, it becomes, you start flowing through it pretty quickly.
Pretty quick to become a power user.
But, I refer to one of the things Josh said to me early on. He goes, if you work at Fugue long enough, you will write code at some point. So, it kind of just depends on what the language is, but you'll be exposed to it. But it's one of those things where I think, if you watch, with social media and everybody's got a tutorial out there, like, that's kind of the way of the world. Like, technology is, you're gonna have to write a line of code here or there, and that's the reality. And having a comfort level with it makes learning something like this that's, again, you can write a single rule which can impact hundreds of accounts and alert your organization to vulnerabilities. That's pretty powerful.
And also putting that power in the hands of your developers. So when we think about, it's not just you have your production environment that you're checking for these vulnerabilities so you can address them, and then maybe giving tools to your developers to check their infrastructure's code. Your developers can be hitting like a Fugue API to scan their dev environments as well. So as they're developing and creating infrastructure, before maybe they advance that to integration, staging, that kind of thing, they can check and get that feedback early on to know if they're doing something wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talk about, moving up the mountain, getting into, Basecamp 3, I believe it's.
Shift left, yeah.
So Dave is asking a limit to what can and cannot be checked. Yeah, so you're limited by what the attributes are. So if for any service, so if you think about it, all of the service details that we have within each of the cloud environments, those are the attributes that are listed in the viz, and even the ones that aren't visualized. So we will cover an entire resource. So all of the attributes associated with an individual resource, you can write a rule to check against that.
That answer your question, Dave?
Hopefully.
Yep. Cool. Well, this was awesome. Again, reach out to us at hello@fugue.co. And let us know if you have any questions, if you want to get started. Obviously, Fugue Developer is free forever for individual developers to use. You can just go to fugue.co/pricing to kind of see what you get with that. But essentially, Fugue takes about 15 minutes to get up and running and get a full interactive visual map of your cloud infrastructure environment and security posture, and start to begin to kind of reason about where you need to focus to bring things into compliance and keep it that way. So hope you check that out. Always love feedback. And I'll throw one more pitch out there. The upcoming Fugue Cloud Security Masterclass, Thinking Like a Hacker. I believe that is on the September 10th. I'll double check that, but you'll be able to find that at that URL. Those are a lot of fun. So, Ricardo, this was awesome. Thanks for showing us custom rules with Fugue using OPA and Regula. It was awesome.
My pleasure. We'll have to figure out what we're going to do next time too.
Yeah. Dave, check your email. All right, Ricardo. Thanks.
Right,
Cheers.